So let's talk about the sequencer real quick, because there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do with that. But maybe we want to do something very specific and something maybe slightly custom with it. And that is setting a certain variable through a sequencer cutscene on a certain actor. And it's actually not that complicated to do that. So let's take a look at how we do something like that. We go into my content folder here, which is full of other stuff from other tutorials. Don't worry about that. And I'm just going to make an actor and call this our BP sequence example or something like that. I'll open that up. And what we're going to do is I add a cube here, and I'm going to make a event tick thing going on here. And we're going to add local rotation to this every tick. And what we're going to be adding will be in the Z direction. We'll add delta seconds multiplied by a variable. So that is the amount of degrees per second that I want this thing to rotate. So let's make that variable and call that something like degrees per second. And we'll add that into here. I'll compile this and give this a default value of like 5, for instance. Adding this into our world here, if I play now, you can see that this thing is very slowly rotating at about 5 degrees per second. Now, let's make a sequencer cinematic here. So if we go level sequence, we call this example scene. Let's put this into the world, set this to autoplay. And if I open this level sequencer, I want to add this thing to there. We see that we have nothing really to go as far as those values go, right? We can't really animate that variable at all, which is a little bit annoying because I want to be able to, through this sequencer, animate the speed at which this thing rotates. Going back into here, and you might have already seen it actually, going to the variable, we can expose this to cinematics, and for that I think it might also need to be instance editable, but it might not be. We can very easily just expose this to cinematics, and then when we compile this, we will now see that the degrees per second property is editable in here, and we can just easily animate it. It is by default set to a value of 5 as we set it up, but let's say that after about a second it is now 15. And it stays there for a couple of seconds at 15, and then it goes back to 5, where it stays for a couple of seconds again. So let's say up until about 120 frames. And that is going to be our sequencer. So let's save that, we can close that again. And if we go into our sequencer, we can check whether or not it should loop. In this case, I do want it to loop. So let's loop it infinitely, it autoplays. So you can see now it's spinning super fast comparatively. And it slows down again because we are animating the variable that it's being used to drive this with. And of course, you can set any variable for this. You can have really weird implementations with this. You can have a variable for aggressiveness that the behavior tree samples and that gets animated through a sequencer cutscene or whatever. It'll be kind of a weird way to deal with that, but it is definitely a possible way to deal with it that allows you a very fine control over very many different things. Although I don't know that I would use it for that use case specifically. But you can be creative and kind of weird with this in any way you want, because you can drive effectively any value suddenly now through a sequencer cutscene. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And of course, an extra massive thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,